The countryside around Richmond was known for its calm, with wide, open fields stretching endlessly and a slow, steady way of life. Palmer's farm sat just off the main road, marked by its old buildings, untouched by the rapid changes elsewhere. Palmer, an elderly farmer who thrived on routine, rarely faced more than the occasional stray animal or broken fence. But that day was different. Something had shattered the familiar peace, leaving an uneasy silence behind. A few days earlier, chatter at the town diner was the usual. Talk of a new mayoral candidate, rising feed costs, or a neighbor's missing dog. But whispers about Palmer's place shifted the mood. When Palmer heard the sharp crack of a loud noise slicing through the calm afternoon, years of protecting his land spurred him into action. His worn boots thudded on the dry ground as he hurried to the old barn. Bridget skimmed through the investigator's report for any clues. The case seemed straightforward. Palmer, a farmer near the highway by Powhatan, Virginia, reported hearing what sounded like pop from his barn. Fearing a hunter had ignored his no-hunting signs, he went to check and found a woman's lifeless body surrounded by deep red stains. He called emergency immediately. Police and medics arrived to find she'd passed. Her car was parked outside with her purse left inside containing ID that named her as Kelly Russell, wife of Barry Russell, a Richmond financial advisor. Detectives found no signs of a struggle or theft. Her wallet, holding $125, was untouched. No tool was found at the scene, but a 9mm shell casing lay on the barn floor. The medical examiner confirmed she was ended at close range by a Colt, with the time of passing around 3 p.m. Bridget's eyes narrowed when she saw a photo of the scene. Kelly was gone instantly, and while Bridget expected to see pain or fear on her face, there was only profound shock. Bridget's heartbeat quickened. This could be it, she thought. After brief condolences, the detective sat in Barry Russell's home office to question him. "Mr. Russell, did your wife have any enemies?" the older detective asked. "No," Barry said, surprised. "Everyone loved Kelly. No one ever said a bad word about her." The detective made a note. "How about between you two? Any disagreements or issues?" "No," Barry said, then paused. "Well, we had the usual bumps. Expenses, priorities, that kind of thing." The younger detective leaned forward. "So, money disagreements?" "We didn't argue," Barry said quickly. "We had minor disagreements, nothing serious." He glanced at the detective's wedding ring. "You're married, right? Haven't you ever disagreed on spending?" The older detective chuckled as the younger one flushed. "Let's talk about that day. Why was she at the Palmer barn?" "I wish I knew," Barry said. "She called and asked me to meet her there at 2 o'clock, saying she had something big to show me but couldn't explain over the phone. I wasn't thrilled about it, especially with an appointment at 4 o'clock, but I agreed." "But you didn't go," the younger detective noted. "No, I got a flat tire on the way. It took a long time to change it, and I got dirty. By the time I finished, I barely made it home to clean up before my client arrived at 4 o'clock. "Why not call AAA?" the older detective asked. "I'm not a member," Barry said. The detective nodded. "And when you called your wife to say you couldn't make it?" Barry lowered his head. "I didn't call her. I rushed out without my phone. By the time I got home, showered, and changed, my client had arrived." "That was at 4 p.m.? the older detective confirmed. "Yes, right on time," Barry said. "And between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m., did anyone see you?" the detective asked. Barry paused. "Not that I know of," the younger detective continued. "You got home around 3:30? Barry nodded. "And then showered, changed into a clean suit, and met your client?" the detective asked. "Exactly," Barry confirmed. "And what did you do after the client left?" "I took my dirty suit to the dry cleaners," Barry said. "Convenient," the detective remarked. "Convenient? What do you mean?" Barry asked, confused. The detective leaned in. "Convenient that you needed a shower right away and took your suit to the cleaners." Barry looked puzzled. "I don't get it." "That would remove any gunpowder or evidence from a shooting," the detective said. Barry's face hardened. "Hold on. I had nothing to do with my wife's death. I told you. I never even got to Palmer's farm. I can't believe you suspect me." The detectives exchanged looks. "Are you a suspect, Mr. Russell? Is there something you want to share about your wife's death?" the older detective asked. Barry's frustration grew. "If I'm a suspect, I need a lawyer. I'm done answering questions without one," he said firmly. The detective stood. "That's your right, but we'll be back, Mr. Russell." Bridget called. "Hey, Jill, it's your little sister." "Hey, BG," Jill replied. "Haven't heard from you in days." "Sorry, I've been deep into my project. I think I found something big." Bridget shared details of the Russell case, mentioning the investigative report and medical examiner's photo. "Wait, BG, How did you get the IOR and ME report? Those are confidential. Bridget chuckled. I might have let an officer think I still write for the Criminals Channel and hinted he'd make a good interview subject. Cops love a bit of publicity. Jill laughed. You'd never get that from me. They joked a bit before Jill asked, So what's next for your big nonfiction debut? Heading to Richmond to talk to the husband, Bridget said. How do you plan to do that? Jill asked, concerned. I already set an appointment with him. Jill's tone turned serious. Be careful. Husbands are usually suspects when a wife is liquidated. He could be dangerous. I know, Jill. I'll be cautious. Just don't take it lightly. If anything happened to you, I'd be devastated. I promise, Jill, I'll keep you updated. Don't make me come to Richmond and bail you out, Jill joked. The next morning, Barry was still upset about the detective's visit, but composed himself for a meeting with a potential client. Business had been slow since the recession, so he was eager for any opportunity. When the doorbell rang, Barry welcomed Bridget Callahan and led her to his office. She appeared around 30 with short brown hair and a slim figure in a business suit, reminding him of Kelly. Once seated, Barry poured coffee, hoping to make her comfortable. So, Miss Callahan, tell me about your financial goals, he said. Bridget set down her cup. First, I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Russell. I can't imagine how difficult it's been. Thank you. That's kind of you, Barry replied. She continued. Second, I must apologize. I'm not here for financial advice. I'm here with a proposition. Barry's expression shifted. You're a salesperson? He asked, annoyed. No, Bridget said calmly. I'm a writer for the Criminals Channel with years of experience in criminal justice. I want to write a book about your wife's death and the investigation. I'm here to ask for your full cooperation. Barry was stunned. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, you're in serious trouble, Bridget replied firmly. Barry stood. If that's a threat, it won't work. I think it's time for you to leave. Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain, Bridget said. If you still want me to go after that, I'll leave. Barry sighed and sat down. 5 minutes. Bridget pulled out her tablet. You've already spoken to the police. It must have been unsettling. How do you know? Barry asked. I've covered many investigations, and they often suspect the husband, Bridget said. Plus, it's in today's Richmond Times-Dispatch. What article? Barry asked. Bridget handed him the tablet, showing a story titled, Police Question Husband in Russell Slaying, mentioning Barry as a person of interest. Barry's face fell. This makes it sound like an arrest is inevitable. Bridget nodded. Barry sank into his chair. I thought we were innocent until proven guilty. In court, yes. But public opinion is different, Bridget said. Just then, Barry's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Excuse me, I need to take this. Hello, Tom. What can I do for you? Barry listened, frowning. Tom, you've been with me for years. Are you unhappy with your results? Another pause. No, that's not true. I had nothing to do with Kelly's death. I loved her. He sighed. All right, I understand. Maybe we can work together once this clears up. Barry hung up and returned to his seat. I can't believe this. One of my oldest clients just pulled his business because his wife's friends think I'm guilty. Bridget reached out sympathetically. I'm so sorry, Barry. This is exactly what I meant. Without an arrest, people start making assumptions, and those often fall on you. Barry buried his face in his hands. I can't believe people who've known me for years could think I'm capable of murder. It's awful, Barry. But when there's no clear evidence, people fill in the blanks. They assume there's something hidden. Bridget sighed. Even if you're proven innocent, some won't hear or believe it. Rumors are more gripping than facts, and doubts often linger long after a case is closed. Good news won't spread like the bad. I can't believe this is real. What am I supposed to do? Change my name and move away? Barry said, defeated. There's another option, and that's why I'm here, Bridget said. Let me tell your story. Share your thoughts and experiences with me so people see the truth. How is that different from the stories on the Criminals Channel? Barry asked. It's completely different, Bridget insisted. TV shows focus on old crimes and only feature the guilty. I want to cover a case as it unfolds, showing what the accused goes through. She paused. Have you read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote? When Barry shook his head, she continued. It's a groundbreaking nonfiction crime book. Capote had deep access to the butchers, revealing their thoughts and dynamics. I want to take it further, follow a case from the start and find the truth as it happens. And what does that mean for me? Barry asked. Everything, Bridget said. This would bring major media attention. People would know not only that you were cleared, but also what you endured. They'd be apologizing and welcoming you back. Barry studied her, then said, There's one problem. What if I'm guilty? Bridget, surprised, composed herself. Then I'll visit you in prison. Barry stared at her, glanced at the news story, then nodded and offered his hand. "All right, Bridget, you have a deal." "Hey, sis, he agreed to let me write his story. He's willing to share everything. This could be my big break." "Congrats, BG. What's your impression of him after meeting in person?" "He's smart and successful, though the recession hit him hard. And now the suspicion around his wife's death is hurting him more." "That's not what I mean. Do you think he's guilty?" "You're always the cop, Jill." "Honestly, I'm not sure. At first, I thought he was innocent. He seemed genuinely upset when talking about his wife, but then he asked, 'What if I'm guilty?' Why would an innocent man say that? I'll be spending the day with him tomorrow and hope to learn more." Jill was silent, then said, "Be careful, Bridget. It's odd he'd even bring up his guilt if he were innocent. Maybe it's a weird sense of humor, but it's concerning." "Yeah, I get it. I'll be careful. I'll update you tomorrow." Bridget mentioned that she hoped she wasn't keeping Barry from his clients as she settled on the couch in his office. Barry, sounding bitter, assured her not to worry and explained that, since the newspaper article, the only calls he had received were from clients canceling their services. He expressed his disbelief at how quickly people judged, adding with a wry smile that, without her, he would have no one to talk to. Bridget, offering a sympathetic look, glanced down at her notes and suggested they get started, asking him to tell her about himself. Barry leaned back, sipping his coffee, and said there wasn't much to tell. He shared that he was born and raised in Richmond, except for his college years at UVA in Charlottesville, where he majored in finance. He had planned to pursue an MBA, but accepted a promising job offer from a major financial firm and discovered he had a knack for financial planning, which convinced him not to go back for an advanced degree. He went on to explain that after a few years, he decided to start his own practice, though the recession later hit hard. Bridget, recording and taking notes, inquired why he chose to branch out on his own and asked if he had always wanted to be his own boss. Barry admitted that was part of it, but added that his first marriage ending was also a factor. Seeing Bridget raise an eyebrow, Barry continued, explaining that he and his first wife were high school sweethearts who both attended UVA. They married right after graduation, but realized they had grown into very different people. While she pursued a drama degree and became heavily involved in various causes, Barry, being more pragmatic and numbers-oriented, found they were no longer compatible. They divorced amicably after a couple of years. When Bridget asked if he had to pay alimony, Barry, smiling slightly, said he was fortunate as she believed alimony was outdated. His only obligation was paying for her MFA tuition, which depleted his savings but ended his financial responsibility. He mentioned they were still friendly, and that she even sent him cards for his birthday and Christmas. Bridget, adding more notes, summarized that Barry had been in his mid-20s, divorced, employed, but essentially broke. Barry agreed, noting that it was an ideal time to take the leap and start his own agency, since he had no dependents or obligations. He worked hard, caught a few breaks, and things improved, especially after he met Kelly. Bridget straightened and asked how they met. Barry, looking slightly embarrassed, admitted they met through an online dating service, explaining that meeting eligible women after college was tough due to his 70 to 80-hour work weeks. Kelly had actually contacted him first. Barry shared that they clicked immediately, finding they had shared values, attitudes, and interests. Both had similar backgrounds. Kelly had left a bad marriage in Atlanta and moved to Richmond for a fresh start, preferring a smaller city as he did. Bridget asked how long they dated before marrying, and Barry blushed, saying they tied the knot after just 6 months. Although it sounded quick, he said they both knew what they wanted. He added, stretching his hands as if pleading, that Bridget had probably seen Kelly's pictures and knew how beautiful she was. But it was her intelligence, values, and style that drew him in. Barry shared that Kelly had even suggested a prenuptial agreement to protect their assets, showing her practicality, which he deeply respected. Slumping back in his seat, Barry concluded that he would never find another like her. That evening, Bridget was reflective as she spoke to her sister. She admitted, "I know I should stay detached, but I can't help liking him. He doesn't seem like someone who would eliminate his wife." Jill's voice turned serious and instructive. She asked, "Do you know what a sociopath is?" Bridget snapped back, "Of course, and Barry isn't one. He's intelligent and caring, dealing with a terrible loss while being unfairly accused. He doesn't show any signs of delusion." Jill countered, "That doesn't rule out being a sociopath. Sociopaths often have traits like charm, intelligence, rational thinking, unreliability, insincerity, lack of remorse, and antisocial behavior." "Where did you get that?" Bridget asked. Jill explained, "From The Mask of Sanity by Hervey Cleckley. It's a classic on psychopathic behavior." Bridget fiercely responded, "Those traits could describe many normal people. And just because he isn't irrational doesn't mean he's dangerous. Plus, you don't know that Barry has traits like dishonesty or antisocial behavior. Calm down, BG. I'm not accusing him. I just want you to stay alert. If he is a sociopath, he could be manipulative. Just keep your eyes open and stay safe. Bridget sighed. All right, I'll be careful. I promise. The next afternoon, as Bridget prepared to visit Barry, her phone rang. It was Jill. I'm glad I caught you, Jill said quickly. Last night we overlooked something important. Didn't you mention that Barry and Kelly had a prenup? Yes, Bridget replied. But why does that matter? Did he say who wanted the prenup? Jill pressed. I don't think he did. Why is that important? Bridget asked, puzzled. Think about it, Jill said urgently. It could be the motive. If Barry's business is failing and he needs money, he wouldn't get access to Kelly's funds through divorce because of the prenup. But if she died, he'd inherit everything. It's the oldest motive, money. Bridget was silent for a moment. Jill pushed. What do you think, BG? Bridget admitted, I hadn't considered that. I need to look into it. She added quickly, I'm running late. I'll call you later. Stay sharp, Jill warned before Bridget hung up. As she drove to Barry's, Bridget's thoughts raced. Could he really be the murderer? Could this all be driven by greed? She reminded herself that Capote's butchers were also driven by theft, and it didn't make the story any less impactful. Yet the idea that Barry might be guilty left her feeling disappointed. He just doesn't seem like the type, she thought sadly. Barry was working on a spreadsheet when Bridget arrived. Seeing her expression, he immediately sensed something was off. He asked what was wrong. Bridget, still standing, took a deep breath and told him that something he mentioned yesterday could be seen as a motive for murder. Barry looked puzzled, so she explained that their prenuptial agreement meant he couldn't access Kelly's premarital assets unless he inherited them after her death. Barry stared at her for a moment before bursting into laughter. He reassured her there was no need for such concerns, explaining that Kelly had planned to lend him money for his business, and they even had a contract with terms. Although unsure where it was, he said he could find it if needed. He added that they were supposed to sign the contract the night she was eliminated. Barry sat heavily on the couch, recalling his last moment with Kelly. Bridget, relieved, apologized for suspecting him, but said she had to explore all angles in the confusing case. Barry understood, saying she was just doing her job, and that he appreciated she didn't want him to be guilty. She gave a small, embarrassed smile. Barry stood up, suggesting they take a break from the stress and enjoy the nice weather. Bridget agreed, and they headed to his car. When she asked where they were going, he just smiled and told her to be patient. She briefly worried he might be heading to the farm where Kelly had died, but he drove north instead, to the Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. Bridget was surprised, but pleased, admitting she hadn't expected that. Barry led her along the garden's winding paths, and they spent the afternoon exploring. At the Asian Valley, they sat on a bench by a pond under Japanese maples, enjoying the peaceful setting. Barry mentioned he liked visiting the garden when he needed to think. As they returned to the car, evening shadows stretched across the ground. Barry apologized for keeping her so long, but Bridget dismissed it, saying it was the first time in a while she had truly relaxed and enjoyed herself. Barry asked if she had plans for the evening, and when she said no, he invited her to dinner, with the condition that they avoid any talk about crime or Kelly. Bridget smiled and agreed. Barry drove them to Bookbinders, a restaurant by the James River. They sat on the patio and shared a bottle of wine, discussing the garden and other places in Richmond Bridget might enjoy. The conversation flowed, with Barry sharing funny stories from college and starting his business. Walking back to the car, Barry offered his jacket when the air turned cooler, and Bridget gratefully accepted. He drove her across the 14th Street Bridge and then north on 301 for a view of the city lights from the Robert E. Lee Bridge. Back at Barry's office, he invited Bridget in for coffee. Still chilled, she agreed. As they sipped, Barry's expression turned awkward, prompting Bridget to ask what was wrong. Barry, realizing he'd talked about himself all evening, apologized, saying he must seem self-absorbed. Bridget laughed, reassuring him she didn't mind, and that learning about him was part of her job for the book. Barry smiled and said it was now his turn to learn about her. Bridget brushed it off, saying there wasn't much to tell, as she was so focused on work that there wasn't room for much else. Barry asked if she had siblings, and she mentioned her older sister, Jill, a detective in D.C. He remarked on how interesting it was that they both pursued criminal justice, though in different ways. Bridget's smile faded as she admitted Jill's career had influenced her. Barry pressed, asking if their father had been a policeman. Bridget grew silent and pale, then began to cry, recalling a traumatic memory. She explained that when she was in 7th grade, she came home to find the door open, which was unusual. She called for her mother but got no response. The living room was in disarray, and there was blood on the floor. Trembling, she peeked into her parents' room and saw her mother's foot sticking out from behind the bed. Bridget described how she discovered her mother's body, torn clothing, and a wound. She sobbed as she recounted calling out to her mother and Jill arriving, pulling her out of the room and calling 911. Barry, shocked and pale, moved closer and comforted her as she revealed the aftermath. Their father's breakdown when he saw what had happened, and his grief-driven self-destruction that night. Bridget explained how people later called her father selfish, but she believed that the man who hurt her mother had also destroyed her father. Through tears, Bridget told Barry how Jill, at 18, became her legal guardian, saving them from foster care. They managed with life insurance and Social Security. Jill's experience led her to become a police officer, while Bridget's focus on criminals came from the same tragedy, although she chose a different path. Bridget buried her face in Barry's shoulder, still overwhelmed by the memories, while Barry held her, deeply affected by her story. Barry embraced her, gently rubbing her back like a parent would comfort a mourning child. "I'm so sorry, Bridget. I don't know what to say." He spoke softly. After a moment, he whispered, "I suppose we both know what it's like to lose someone we love to violence." Surprised, she pulled back to look at him and noticed a reflection of her own pain mirrored in his expression. In her grief, she'd forgotten he had recently lost his wife. She pulled him close again, and they held each other tightly, both lost in their sorrow. After a while, they both calmed, and Bridget leaned back to meet Barry's eyes. She moved forward and kissed him gently on the lips. He returned her kiss with warmth and gratitude. When she pulled back this time, determination filled her gaze. She leaned in once more, but this time her kiss was filled with promise. The raw emotion she had felt transformed into passion, and her lips parted as she deepened the kiss. Almost instantly, the heat between them intensified, and they embraced passionately, like lovers reunited after a long absence. Barry pulled back and held her at arm's length. "Are you sure, Bridget?" he asked. Without a moment's doubt, she replied, "I'm as sure as I've ever been." He brought her back into his arms and kissed her fervently on the lips, eyes, and neck. Suddenly, he swept her into his arms and carried her to the master bedroom, laying her down and lying beside her. They began undressing each other between kisses, urgently trying to remove all obstacles between them. But as Barry pulled at her knit top, he sensed a hesitation in her movements, and when his hand brushed over her stomach, he felt the tension in her muscles. "What's wrong, Bridget?" he asked with concern. "Do you want me to stop?" He pulled his hand away, but she took it and guided it back to her chest. "No, don't stop," she said. "It's just that I've never done this before." She looked away, embarrassed, as he stared at her in surprise. After a moment, he kissed her softly. "That's okay," he reassured her gently. "I know how to take care of you." He stood and undressed to his boxer briefs, then helped her out of her clothes. As he slipped off her skirt, he almost chuckled when he noticed her playful polka-dot underwear. He asked her to turn onto her stomach on the bed. Straddling her hips, he began to rub her back and neck in long, soothing motions. Within minutes, he felt the tension leave her body, and she made a contented sound as he worked. When he felt she was relaxed enough, he moved lower and massaged her hips. Though he avoided any intimate touches, the pressure felt good, and soon he could sense her arousal. When his hand moved away, she sighed, but the sound turned to pleasure as he caressed her abdomen. He shifted back to run his hands along her legs, bending her knees and positioning her to lie open before him. Seeing the signs of her desire, he teased her inner thighs, making her moan and lift her hips. When he pulled back, she groaned in frustration. He repeated this, building anticipation until her body moved restlessly, seeking more. Suddenly, her eyes opened wide with desperation. "Please, don't make me wait any longer. I need you." He slipped off his boxer briefs and positioned himself between her legs. After a moment of hesitation and initial discomfort, he reassured her until they moved together in a rhythm that turned tentative into comforting. Soon, their shared warmth and connection deepened, blending trust with newfound passion. When she looked up at him, eyes full of wonder, a gentle smile spread as comfort replaced uncertainty, and they continued together, connected and assured. Barry noticed her hesitation and gently shifted her on top, encouraging her to set the pace and focus on what felt right. Bridget adjusted and began to move, gradually gaining confidence as their connection deepened. Their shared intensity grew, with Barry supporting and responding to her lead. The room filled with the sounds of their mutual passion until they both reached a powerful climax. Bridget, overwhelmed by the experience, collapsed onto his chest, and they lay together, breathing heavily. Moments later, she rolled to his side, and they rested in a comfortable silence, satisfied and close. After a moment, she rolled onto her back, still breathing heavily. Barry got out of bed and went to the bathroom, returning with a wet cloth and towel for her. Once she was done, he joined her under the covers, and they both fell asleep. The morning sun woke Barry, and he turned to look at his alarm clock, surprised to see he had overslept. As the events of the previous night came back to him, he turned to find Bridget, but she was gone. He scanned the room and checked the bathroom, but found nothing. Back at the bed, he noticed a note on the pillow she'd used. "Hey, sleepyhead. I had an early appointment, so I let myself out. Bridget, P.S. I'll call you. P.P.S. You snore. P.P.P.S. last night. Wow. Hey, Jill, sorry I didn't call you last night. Where were you? I got worried when you didn't call. Sorry, sis, but something amazing happened. What did you do, BG? Wait, oh my gosh, you were with him. I can hear it in your voice. I never could keep secrets from you. It's like you can read my mind. Are you serious? I can't believe you let that happen. Do you know the risk you took? He could have hurt you, just like what happened to Mom. No, Jill, it wasn't like that. He didn't push me into anything. If anything, I started it. We were talking about Mom. You told him about her? Why would you do that, BG? We were talking about our pasts and everything just came out. I was crying, he comforted me, and when I calmed down, I remembered his wife was also murdered. Then I wanted to comfort him, and things got intense. Now I'm not a maid anymore. So he took advantage when you were emotionally vulnerable? No, not at all. He was gentle, kind, and loving. I felt completely safe. I don't think he could ever be violent. Listen, Bridget Callahan, no matter how you feel, the fact is someone murdered his wife and he's still a suspect. Plus, he has every reason to charm you since you're writing a book that could clear his name. Of course he wants you to trust him. I understand your point, but you don't know him like I do. Anyway, before you start another lecture, I promise to be cautious and stay in touch. Pinky promise, sis. All right, BG, just don't forget. If anything happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. I feel the same way about you. Mid-morning, Barry answered the phone, hoping it was a potential client. Instead, a muffled voice said, "Is this Barry Russell?" "Yes, I'm Barry Russell." "The Barry Russell who was married to Kelly Russell?" "Yes." "What's this about?" "You think your wife was perfect, but she was nothing more than a common cheater." "What? Who is this? You have no right to insult my late wife." "It's no insult, just the truth, Russell. Don't believe me? She was with Bill McAvoy right under your nose." "Bill McAvoy? Kelly didn't even know him, and she'd never do anything like that. Ask her friends. I bet they all knew. Some probably even helped her keep it from you. Listen, whoever you are, and while you're mourning her, they're probably laughing at you behind your back." "Who are you?" Barry shouted, but the line had already disconnected. Minutes later, Barry was on his way to Jared and Susan Jackson's house. Susan, one of Kelly's closest friends, answered the door. "Oh, Barry, you startled me. If you're looking for Jared, he's at work," she said nervously. "I actually need to talk to you, Susan. May I come in?" he asked coldly. "Of course," she said quickly. "I'm sorry we haven't visited since the funeral. Things have been so hectic." He raised a hand to stop her. Knowing Susan would defend Kelly if asked directly, he took a more direct approach. Crossing his arms, he stared at her intently. "How long did you know about Kelly and Bill McAvoy?" he demanded. He saw her eyes widen, and she was silent for a moment, clearly searching for words. That pause told him enough. The caller was right. The surge of adrenaline faded, and he sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "What about Kelly and Bill?" Susan asked weakly. "Please, don't lie to me, Susan. It's too late for that," he said. Susan sat across from him, nervously wringing her hands. "Barry, I don't know what to say." "Just answer. How long did it last?" Her eyes darted around, but finding no escape, she sighed. "I don't know, maybe 6 months." "6 months!" Barry shouted, and she flinched. "How could you not tell me?" "I tried to warn her, Barry. I told her it was dangerous, but she wouldn't listen." Remembering the caller's words, Barry asked, "Who else knew?" "Eventually, most of us," Susan admitted reluctantly. "Kelly barely tried to hide it. Some even wondered if you knew and accepted it." "You know me better than that!" Barry shouted angrily. "I would never allow that." Susan paled and shrank back into her chair. Barry calmed himself, sadness overtaking his anger. "Why didn't you tell me, Susan? 6 months and you said nothing?" "I couldn't, Barry. She was my friend." He stood, eyes cold. "I thought you were my friend, too." "Thanks for nothing." He walked out, leaving Susan shaken as she reached for her phone to call others. Late that afternoon, Bridget arrived at Barry's house and rang the doorbell. When he opened the door, she was taken aback to see him holding a bag of frozen peas against his eye. "Barry, what happened?" she exclaimed. "I got into a fight," he said, guiding her into his office. "A fight?" Bridget repeated, stunned. "That's so unlike you." Barry explained everything, starting from the anonymous phone call to his confrontation with Susan Jackson. "After Susan confirmed what I feared, I went straight to McAvoy's office. The guy inherited a fortune when his wife passed away from cancer and now spends his days managing investments. He was in a meeting when I walked in, but I interrupted them. When I introduced myself, he looked shocked at first, but then he smirked. I couldn't help myself. I hit him. He attempted a smile, but the pain in his eye made him wince. Turns out his assistant knows martial arts. They dragged me out, and McAvoy threatened to call the police if I returned." Bridget was shocked. "Barry, you committed attack. He could have you arrested." "I doubt he'll press charges given the reason I confronted him. Besides, I'm the one who walked away with an injury." Bridget frowned. "You don't seem very remorseful for someone who just started a fight." Barry's expression darkened. "I don't even know how to feel right now. I've been mourning my wife's death, only to find out she was cheating on me the entire time. How do I feel? I'm angry, hurt, confused, and I don't regret going after the guy she was involved with." Bridget flinched at his outburst, but sympathy welled up inside her as she tried to grasp the turmoil he was facing. "Barry, I'm so sorry this happened. I can't imagine what you're going through." She reached for his hand. "Would you like some company tonight just to talk?" He shook his head, wincing from the pain. "Honestly, I need time alone to sort this out. It's overwhelming to realize that everything I believed was a lie." He took her hands in his eyes full of intensity. "I can't believe she betrayed me. And I can't believe all my so-called friends knew and kept it from me. The fact that they knew and said nothing makes it even worse. Kelly acted like it didn't matter if I found out, as if she had no respect for me. That makes me furious." As he spoke, his grip on her hands tightened until Bridget cried out, "Barry, you're hurting me." He immediately let go and apologized. "I'm sorry, Bridget. I didn't realize. This is why I need to be alone tonight." She nodded and gently touched his face. "I'll call you tomorrow to check in," she promised, turning to leave. As she drove away, worry etched her brow. "I've never seen that side of him before," she thought. "Hey, sis, it's me." "What's wrong, BG? Yesterday you sounded like you were on top of the world. Tonight it's like you're carrying the weight of the world. What's going on?" "Jill, I'm really confused about Barry. Let me tell you what happened today." Bridget then shared everything that happened, including Barry's confrontation with Bill McAvoy and the anger she saw in him. "It was like he turned into a different person, sis. The rage in him was something I'd never seen before. It was a little scary." "Wow, that's quite a story, and it raises some interesting questions. What if Kelly's murder wasn't about money, but jealousy? You know as well as I do how many husbands kill their wives over that." "But that can't be it, sis. He only found out about her cheating today." "We don't know that for sure, BG. All we know is that he confirmed today who she was cheating with. What if he found out about her being unfaithful before today? What if he was the one who lured her to that farmhouse and liquidated her out of jealousy?" "I don't know, sis. He didn't seem that way when I talked to him this afternoon." "Exactly, BG. He's acting. That's what I've been trying to warn you about. Men like him can be really convincing." "I hear you, but I still don't think that's the case." "All right, but while you're considering that, let me give you something else to think about. I've been doing some digging from up here, and it turns out that being faithful wasn't the only thing Kelly lied about." "What do you mean, Jill?" "Kelly Russell's background is more complicated than Barry ever told you. I'd even guess it's more complicated than he knows. I traced her past, and here's what I found. She came from a poor family in Florala, Alabama, a small town right on the Alabama-Florida border. She attended Florala High School and was a cheerleader for the Wildcats. She also started dating Johnny Rayburn back then. After high school, she and Johnny both attended Jefferson Davis Community College in Bruton, Alabama. Eventually, they got married." "Really?" Bridget said. "I'm sure Barry has no idea about that." "Wait, there's more. She left Rayburn after a year or two and moved to Atlanta. She must have been quite attractive because she met her next husband while working as a bartender at Coyote Ugly. He was a contractor making good money during the construction boom in Atlanta. They got married quickly, but after just a few years, he died suddenly of a heart attack. After that, she moved to Richmond, and that's where she met Barry." "Wow, she really had quite a life." "There's one more thing, BG. The contractor's family in Atlanta never liked Kelly, and they didn't believe he had heart issues. They've been pressuring the police and courts to reopen the investigation into his death." "Huh, that's all interesting, Jill, and it'll definitely add to my book, but I'm not sure how it fits into what's happening now." Do you think someone in the contractor's family could be the butcher? I'm not sure, BG. I'm just trying to help you gather enough clues to piece this together. But one thing's for sure. Don't let your guard down around Barry Russell. He now has 2 potential motives for eliminating his wife, and that's more than anyone else we know of. No matter how charming he seems or how good things were between you. Stay cautious. Promise me? Well, you don't need to worry for now. I have interviews lined up for the next 2 days with others who knew both Barry and Kelly, so I won't be seeing him anytime soon. Despite being busy over the next 2 days, Bridget couldn't stop thinking about Barry. His confrontation with Kelly's lover unsettled her, and she took her sister's warnings seriously. Still, she couldn't shake the emotions that had emerged after their night together. She longed to reconnect and understand what was truly happening, so it stung when he didn't call. On the 3rd day, she was excited to see a missed call from him. But as she listened to his long message, her excitement turned into worry. Bridget, I just got a call from the same person who told me about Kelly's affair. It sounded like a man, but the voice was muffled, just like before. He claims to have information about who liquidated Kelly and wants to meet at Palmer's barn today at 5 o'clock. I have to go alone or I won't find out the truth. I know it's risky, but I need to do this. If I discover what happened, you'll be able to finish your book. And if I don't come back, at least you'll know where to tell the police to look. The message ended. Bridget felt torn. Like Barry, she wanted answers about Kelly Russell's murder. It was clear the caller knew a lot about Barry's late wife, perhaps enough to solve the case. But she was also deeply worried for Barry. Going alone to the place where his wife had been eliminated seemed dangerous. She wanted to get Jill's advice but couldn't reach her at the station. When she tried Jill's cell, it went straight to voicemail. Hearing her sister's voice on the recording seemed to solidify Bridget's decision, and she left a detailed message explaining what happened and her plan. After hanging up, she tried calling Barry, only to find her phone battery had died. Frustrated, she tossed it into her bag. If I get to the farm early, I can see who meets Barry, she thought. I'll deal with charging my phone later. Just minutes later, Jill returned to the station. Hey, the sergeant called to her. Your sister left a message while you were out. Jill turned on her phone, and the message light appeared once it connected to the network. When she listened to Bridget's message, a chill ran down her spine. She quickly dialed her sister, but it went to voicemail. Bridget, it's me. Do not go to that barn. Do you hear me? It's a trap. There was no anonymous call. Barry made it up to lure you there. He's going to kill you like he did his wife. Call me as soon as you get this, but whatever you do, don't go. After hanging up, she called the Richmond police and asked for the detective in charge of the Russell case. When he wasn't available, she spoke to the sergeant on duty and explained her fears. Although he didn't seem to grasp the urgency, he promised to send a patrol car to the farm. Jill hung up, frustrated that the gravity of the situation hadn't registered. God, what do I do now? She whispered anxiously. Once Bridget passed Route 288, traffic on Anderson Highway was nearly non-existent, and she felt confident she would reach the Palmer farm in time to find a good hiding spot to watch Barry's meeting with the mysterious caller. But her confidence vanished when a loud pop and the sluggish response of the steering wheel signaled a flat tire. This can't be happening, she muttered as she pulled the rental car onto the highway shoulder. This is exactly what happened to Barry when Kelly was liquidated. She stepped out and walked around to the right front wheel, staring at it helplessly. She'd never changed a tire before. Barry carefully pushed the barn door open with the barrel of his father's old Winchester. He hadn't used the tool since going hunting with his father years ago, but he wasn't going to step into the barn without some form of protection. The dim interior was lit only by narrow beams of light piercing through holes in the corrugated tin roof. Barry scanned the space and saw that it appeared empty. Good, he thought. I made it here first. He noticed some old hay bales to one side and settled behind them, positioning himself to watch the entrance for any arrivals. Bridget left the flat tire on the roadside and threw the jack back into the trunk without securing it. She climbed into the driver's seat and pulled back onto the highway, hoping she had put the spare tire on correctly. Please let me get to that barn in time, she thought anxiously. Barry's eyes had adjusted to the dimness, and in the silence he could hear every creak and groan the old barn made when the wind pressed against it. Because of this, he picked up the faint sound of a footstep behind him. Before he could turn, a sharp blow to the back of his head sent him into darkness. The pain in his head brought him back to consciousness. When he lifted his head off the ground, nausea washed over him, and he turned to the side to vomit. Definitely a concussion, he thought numbly. The pain returned as he tried to touch his head, only to find his hands and feet bound. His fingers traced over dusty leather, and he realized he was tied up with the old reins he had noticed hanging from the barn wall. Part of him was surprised he could think so clearly, given the pain in his head. He then heard a new sound and slowly lifted his head to look at the barn door. It creaked open, and a shadowy figure stepped inside. "Well, well," said a man's voice. "Looks like you followed instructions and didn't bring anyone with you." Barry struggled to sit up, managing it despite a fresh wave of pain shooting through his head. He gasped, then focused on the figure speaking to him. It was a man, but Barry was sure he'd never seen him before. "Who are you?" Barry groaned, struggling through the pain. "Oh, that's right. We haven't been properly introduced," the figure said mockingly. "You don't know me. I'm Kelly's husband." Barry stared at him, bewildered. "But I'm her husband," he mumbled. "No," the man said. "You were just her latest victim." Barry wondered if the hit to his head had done more damage than he thought. "So you're the guy she was married to in Atlanta?" He tried again. No, the man snapped. "I'm Johnny Rayburn, her real husband." Seeing Barry's blank expression, he started pacing in front of him. "Kelly was my high school sweetheart in Florala, and we got married while attending Jeff Davis. But when the economy went bad, I couldn't find a decent job. Kelly always had a taste for nice things I couldn't give her. Eventually she left, probably looking for something better. It took me a while, but I finally found her in Atlanta, working at some dive. She said she was happy to see me, but by then she'd latched onto some wealthy contractor who could give her everything she wanted. She told me she had a plan for us to be together again, but I had to stay out of sight until she could get him to marry her. He did marry her, of course. No one could resist Kelly. After a while, she called me to help with her plan. One night, after giving him some extra affection, she waited until he was lying there, exhausted and half asleep. I sneaked in and jumped on his chest. Rayburn chuckled darkly. He couldn't even move his arms from under the covers. You should have seen his face before I pressed the pillow down on him. After I finished and left, Kelly acted like nothing happened. She laid down beside him and slept there until morning, so it would look like he died naturally in his sleep. He shook his head. I don't know if I could have done that. But it didn't bother her at all. Rayburn's expression darkened. But I guess he had the last laugh. Turns out he was deep in debt, and Kelly barely got anything after he died. She told me she needed to find another rich guy before we could be together again. Things got a little too risky in Atlanta, so she decided to move. Even through his pain, Barry managed to say, and that's when she moved to Richmond and found me. Rayburn let out a mocking laugh. Yeah, Barry Russell, the big money guy. But you turned out to be another letdown. When your business started tanking, Kelly decided not to wait around for the next opportunity. I suppose that's when Bill McAvoy entered the picture, Barry said, bitterness in his voice. Exactly, genius. But she needed to get rid of you first, so she called me. But why liquidate me? Barry argued. She could have just divorced me and gone straight to McAvoy. Rayburn looked at Barry as if he were clueless. She had to get something out of it, didn't she? With that prenup in place, the only way she'd see any money was if you died. Barry was still trying to piece it together. But Kelly ended up dead, not me. Rayburn's face twisted with anger and regret. The plan was set. I was hiding here in the barn, waiting for you to come in so I could shoot you as the unknown assailant. But you never showed. Suddenly, Kelly burst through that door to find out what was going on, and I ended her by mistake. It's all your fault. Rayburn waved his Colt in Barry's face, and Barry frantically searched for any way to stall or distract him. He tried, but in his weakened state, his attempts to free his hands were futile. Johnny, you don't have to do this. Eliminating me won't change anything now. Just leave me here and run while you can, Barry pleaded. Rayburn paced back and forth, agitated. No, I have to finish this. She loved me. I have to do what she wanted. Just as Rayburn started to lift his magnum again, a voice called from outside. Barry, are you in there? Are you okay? Before Barry could shout a warning, Bridget burst into the barn, freezing in shock as she saw Johnny Rayburn aim his tool at her. So you did bring a friend, he said with a smirk. And a pretty one, too. Looks like I have two to deal with now. He looked Bridget up and down, a wicked smile spreading across his face. But first, I'm going to have some fun. It's been a while since I've had a woman. No! Bridget screamed, tears streaming down her face. Stay away from me! Rayburn ignored her, tucking the tool into his belt behind him as he moved toward her. Barry's heart sank as he remembered Bridget's past trauma. She must be terrified, he thought helplessly. Get away from her, he shouted, but Rayburn didn't even flinch. Then, as Barry watched in horror, he noticed something unexpected in Bridget's eyes. That's not fear, he realized. That's anger. As Rayburn reached out for her, he taunted, I'm going to enjoy this. Bridget shouted loudly, Not this time! To Rayburn's and Barry's shock, she reached behind her, pulled out a snub-nosed .38, and fired. The shot hit Rayburn in the midsection, making him double over before he fell backward onto the straw-covered ground. groaning in pain. Bridget stood staring at him for a moment, then ran to Barry, kneeling beside him as she cried and hugged him. "Are you okay, Barry?" she asked urgently. "My head's liquidating me," he said, "but I'll be fine. Thank God you're safe. Can you help untie my hands?" As she worked on his bonds, a voice called out, "Bridget! Bridget!" They looked up to see a woman entering the barn, holding a colt in the classic two-handed weaver stance. "Jill!" Bridget screamed, running to embrace her sister. They hugged tightly, tears of relief streaming down their faces. After a moment, Bridget asked, "How did you get here?" Jill held her close. "When I heard your voicemail, I drove straight from D.C. with the police cruiser's siren blaring the whole way. I promised I'd never let anything happen to you." As Bridget hugged her gratefully, Jill glanced suspiciously at Barry and the figure on the floor. "What did Barry do? And who's that man?" "Oh, I almost forgot about Barry," Bridget exclaimed. She pulled Jill toward him. "Help me untie him." While the sisters worked to untie Barry from the old leather reins, Barry noticed movement from Rayburn on the floor and shouted, "That's Johnny Rayburn. He has a colt in his waistband." Jill swiftly approached Rayburn, rolled him over, and found the colt still tucked in his belt. She took it and placed it in her own. Rayburn let out a terrible cry, and Jill turned him over again to check his injury. She grabbed her phone and called 911, requesting an ambulance and the police. When she returned to Barry, he said, "If you check the ballistics on that Magnum, I'm sure it will match the one used to liquidate Kelly." Jill looked from Barry to Bridget. "So, her first husband was behind all of this?" Barry nodded. "And from what he said, I doubt they were ever legally divorced." He glanced at Rayburn, noting how pale he had become. "How is he?" he asked Jill. In a quiet voice, she replied, "He's losing a lot of blood. There's not much I can do for a stomach wound. I don't think he'll make it until the EMTs arrive." Bridget whimpered softly, and Jill hugged her. "It's okay, BG. You did what you had to. I'm proud of you." Barry gave Bridget a confused look. "I didn't know you had a tool. Where did that come from?" Bridget shrugged, a bit embarrassed. "Jill gave it to me years ago. After what happened to Mom, I've always hated colts, but Jill insisted I carry one for protection. I've kept it in my purse all this time, but this was the first time I ever used it." Just then, Johnny Rayburn groaned again. The three of them moved over and knelt by his side. He opened his eyes and, seeing Barry, spoke in a strained voice. "I lied to you. It wasn't an accident. When she came into the barn and realized you weren't here, she got mad. I begged her to forget the plan and leave with me. That's when she said she didn't love me and would never take me back. Then she laughed and I ended her." Barry, Bridget, and Jill exchanged looks. Rayburn's voice grew weaker. Barry noticed that speaking had caused more trouble. To their surprise, Rayburn began to laugh. "You can't escape me this time, Kelly. I know where you've gone, and I'm coming too." He let out one last laugh before his head fell back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Jill reached out to check his carotid artery and then shook her head, closing his eyelids. While waiting for the EMTs and police, Barry recounted everything Rayburn had confessed, and Jill added what she had discovered in her research. When the medical team arrived and decided Barry should go to the hospital for observation, Bridget insisted on following him in her car. Jill offered to stay behind to explain everything to the police. As Barry was secured on the gurney for the ride back to Richmond, Bridget kissed him before heading to her car. Jill came over and patted his arm. "I owe you an apology, Barry. I was convinced you were a sociopath, that you'd eliminated Kelly and might hurt Bridget too. But it turns out Kelly was the real sociopath, and her first husband was her butcher. I'm sorry for doubting you." Barry smiled. "No worries, Jill. I get it." Jill looked at him seriously. "Just don't ever do anything to hurt my little sister." Barry glanced at the attendants loading Johnny Rayburn's body into the other ambulance, then looked back at Jill and shook his head. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said.